Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into a really fascinating topic that kind of bridges the natural world and the digital one, natural computing.
Yeah, it's a great one. The material you sent in explores this amazing intersection, how nature gives us ideas for computing, but also how computing helps us figure nature out.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is really to pull out the key ideas, those sort of aha moments from the sources, and make it all clear and, well, engaging.
Consider it your crash course in a field that's genuinely reshaping things.
Okay, so the sources really hit three main areas, right? We've got computing with actual natural stuff like DNA.
Wild idea.
Then there are algorithms inspired by nature, evolution, brains even, like ant colonies.
Yeah, the bio-inspired stuff. Very cool.
And finally, using computers to understand nature better, climate modeling, ecosystems, that kind of thing.
Exactly. So a lot to cover.
Definitely. Okay, let's start at the beginning then. What exactly is natural computing sort of at its core?
Well, fundamentally, it's about looking at natural systems, how they work, how they process information, how they solve problems, and using that as inspiration.
Inspiration for new ways to compute.
New ways to compute, yeah, but also just to understand the world better. It's super interdisciplinary. Biology, physics, computer science, engineering, they all feed into it.
And you mentioned those three main branches the sources laid out.
Right. So first, computing with natural materials. Using things like DNA, molecules, maybe even quantum mechanics to actually do the calculations.
Okay.
Second, computational understanding of natural processes. That's more about building models, running simulations to figure out how, say, an ecosystem works or how a disease spreads.
Right, using computation as a tool to study nature.
Precisely. And third, bio-inspired algorithms. This is where we look at evolution or neural networks in the brain or how swarms behave, and we try to design algorithms based on those principles.
It's amazing. And it's not even a brand new idea, is it? The history goes way back.
Yeah, the sources you shared were interesting on this. It hinted at precursors like ancient automata, those old mechanical contraptions trying to mimic life.
Huh.
And then you get thinkers in the 19th century like Babbage and Lovelace already suggesting computation could be broader than just, number crunching.
Right, thinking beyond arithmetic. And then the 20th century saw some really key breakthroughs.
Oh, absolutely. Mid-century was huge. You've got Turing and his universal machine, Wiener and cybernetics, the very first ideas about artificial neural networks from McCulloch and Pitts.
Foundational stuff.
Totally. And your sources pointed out that even Turing, back in the 50s, was sketching out ideas for chemical computers.
Chemical computers, wow. Okay, that's definitely thinking outside the box. And then it seems like later in the century, the focus really shifted to algorithms directly inspired by nature.
Exactly. The 60s brought cellular automata. We'll get to those. Then John Holland really nailed down genetic algorithms in the 70s. The 80s gave us things like simulated annealing, inspired by physics.
Right, cooling metals slowly.
Yeah, that kind of process. And then the 90s and early 2000s just exploded.
How so?
Well, backpropagation in 86 really kicked neural networks back into high gear. The 90s saw swarm intelligence take off, ant colony optimization, particle swarm optimization.
Ants and birds, basically.
Pretty much. And then the really unconventional stuff hit. Adelman's DNA computing experiment in 94 was huge. Plus, serious progress in quantum computing and these ideas of membrane computing, chemical computing bubbling up.
And that leads us kind of up to today, with the deep learning boom really showing the power of these bio-inspired neural networks, especially for things like images and language.
Absolutely. It's a rich history, constantly looking back to nature.
Okay, so let's dig into those biological foundations then. How can we actually view biological systems as, well, computational models?
It's fascinating because really, biological systems process information at every level. It's fundamental to how they function.
From the smallest scale up.
Yeah, absolutely. From molecules right up to whole ecosystems, information is constantly being managed, processed, acted upon.
The sources laid out this hierarchy really well, starting right down at the molecular level.
Right. So DNA itself is the primary information storage, holding the genetic code.
The blueprint.
Exactly. Then RNA acts as the messenger, carries that information, and does other jobs too. And RNA gets translated into proteins.
Which are the workhorses, doing all the tasks.
Pretty much. And the complex interactions between all these molecules in pathways like gene regulatory networks, that's information processing. It's deciding what the cell should do based on signals.
Okay. And then moving up a level to the cells themselves, they communicate using signals too.
Precisely. Cells use chemical signals, hormones, neurotransmitters to send messages and coordinate actions across the organism. Think of signaling pathways, like little computational circuits within the cell. A signal comes in, gets processed, triggers a specific response.
And then, of course, the big one at the organism level is the brain, the neural structures.
Oh, absolutely. The nervous system is the prime example of sophisticated information processing. Your brain is constantly taking in sensory data, processing it, making decisions, controlling movement.
Different parts handling different jobs, like the cortex, the cerebellum.
Exactly. Each specialized area processes certain types of information incredibly efficiently.
And this information processing doesn't even stop at the individual organism. Even ecosystems show signs of it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point from the sources. Think about collective behaviors, birds flocking, fish schooling.
Ant swarms again.
Right. These emerge from simple local interactions. Each individual is processing information about its neighbors, its environment, and that leads to these complex, coordinated group patterns. It's a kind of distributed information processing.
Which links to that idea of self-organization the sources mentioned. Simple rules leading to complex outcomes.
Exactly that. It's a key concept. You don't need a central controller dictating everything. Simple local interactions can spontaneously create complex global order, like patterns on a seashell or those zebra stripes we mentioned.
So it's like nature's own distributed computing.
Pretty much. And that's hugely inspirational for designing our own computational systems. If we can figure out those simple local rules, we might be able to build really robust, scalable systems that don't need a central point of failure. Swarm intelligence algorithms are a direct attempt to do that.
Fascinating. Simple agents, complex results. Okay, let's pivot to genetics and evolution. The sources frame these as potentially the ultimate algorithms. Why that perspective?
Well, think about DNA again. It's the ultimate information storage molecule, right?
Yeah, incredibly dense.
And the central dogma DNA to RNA to protein, that flow of information, is a computation. It's decoding the blueprint to build and run the organism.
All right, DNA is the plan, RNA translates, proteins build.
Precisely. And understanding that process underpins, all of modern biology, biotech, medicine. But it also sparks ideas like using DNA itself for data storage.
Which you mentioned earlier, people are actually encoding digital data in DNA.
They are. Successfully. The potential density is astronomical compared to silicon. It really makes you think about information processing in a biological context.
Wild. Okay, and then there's evolution itself, natural selection, Darwin's principles, variation, inheritance, differential survival, reproduction. How is that algorithmic?
Well, think about what those principles describe. It's an iterative process of refinement. You have a population of varied solutions, individual. They pass on their traits. Some are better suited to the environment, so they survive and reproduce more.
Differential survival and reproduction.
Right. So over generations, the population adapts, gets fitter for its environment. That whole process, generating variations, testing them against an environment, and selecting the better ones, that's essentially what evolutionary algorithms do in a computer.
So we're mimicking natural selection to solve computational problems.
Exactly. And the modern evolutionary synthesis, which combined Darwin with genetics, gave us a deeper understanding of how variation arises, mutation, gene flow, drift. That feeds directly into how we design these evolutionary strategies in computing.
Okay, so how do these algorithms actually work in practice? What are the nuts and bolts?
The core idea is you start with a population of candidate solutions. Could be anything. Potential designs, schedules, strategies.
Right.
Each one gets evaluated by a fitness function, basically. How good is this solution at solving the problem?
Okay, a score.
Yeah, a score. Then you introduce variation, usually through crossover, which is like combining good bits from two parent solutions, and mutation, which makes small random changes.
Mimicking genetic recombination and mutation.
Precisely. And finally, selection, the fitter solutions, are more likely to be chosen to create the next generation. You repeat this loop, evaluate, vary, select over and over. The population gradually evolves better solutions.
The sources mention different flavors, like genetic algorithms, GAs. What's specific about them?
GAs often represent solutions as chromosomes, which are strings of genes. These genes could be binary bits, real numbers, whatever fits the problem. The key is how you encode the solution. Then they use specific selection methods and those crossover mutation operators to evolve the population.
In genetic programming, GP, how's that different?
GP takes it a step further. The things evolving aren't just data structures, they're actual computer programs or equations, usually represented as trees.
Like evolving code.
Exactly. The nodes in the tree are functions or inputs. Crossover swaps branches between trees, mutation changes nodes. You're literally evolving programs to perform a task.
That's incredible. And then there were evolution strategies and evolutionary programming.
Yeah, those tend to focus more on problems with real-valued numbers. They often put more emphasis on mutation than crossover, and they have this neat idea of self-adaptation, where the algorithm can actually tune its own parameters, like mutation rates as it runs.
Adapting the adaptation process itself. Clever. And lastly, multi-objective optimization.
Right, because lots of real-world problems aren't about finding one best solution, but balancing several conflicting goals, like faster and cheaper.
Trade-offs.
Exactly. Multi-objective optimization aims to find a set of solutions representing the best possible trade-offs, the Pareto front. Improving one objective means worsening another, so you get a set of optimal compromises, not just one winner.
Makes sense. It sounds like evolutionary computation is incredibly versatile. The sources listed applications from engineering and scheduling to art and drug design.
Oh, absolutely. Because they're good at exploring complex, messy search spaces where you don't necessarily know the best approach beforehand. Optimizing routes, designing materials, financial trading, finding bugs in software. They pop up everywhere.
Really powerful toolkit. Okay, let's switch gears to another huge area of inspiration, neural structures and functioning. The bedrock of AI, really. Starting biologically, what's the basic structure of a neuron?
Okay, so your typical biological neuron has a main cell body, then these branching extensions called dendrites that receive signals.
The inputs.
Right, the inputs. And then a long projection called an axon that sends signals out.
The output.
Yeah, and the connections between neurons where signals pass are called synapses.
Gotcha. And how does the signal actually travel?
It's electrochemical. If a neuron gets enough input signals, it fires an electrical pulse and action potential down its axon.
All or nothing?
Pretty much. When that pulse reaches the synapse, it triggers the release of chemical messengers, neurotransmitters.
Okay.
Those chemicals cross the gap and bind to the next neuron, either exciting it, making it more likely to fire, or inhibiting it, making it less likely.
And the strength of those connections, the synapses can change. That's plasticity, right? Crucial for learning.
Exactly. Synaptic plasticity is key. Connections strengthen with use, weaken with disuse. That's thought to be the fundamental basis of learning and memory in the brain, like paths getting worn in a forest.
Okay, great analogy. So how do we try and capture that in an artificial neuron? What are the parts there?
Well, an artificial neuron is basically a mathematical function. It takes numerical inputs. Each input has a weight associated with it.
Like the synapse strength.
Yeah, analogous to that. It represents the input's importance. These weighted inputs get summed up.
Added together.
Right. And then that sum is passed through an activation function. This function decides the neuron's output, and crucially, it adds nonlinearity, which lets the network learn complex patterns, not just straight lines.
So the learning part is adjusting those weights.
Exactly. The weights, and sometimes a bias term, are adjusted during training. The goal is usually to minimize the difference between the network's output and the correct answer. Algorithms like gradient descent are used to figure out how to adjust the weights to reduce the error.
Like rolling a ball downhill to find the lowest point, the lowest error.
That's a classic way to think about it, yeah.
But the sources stressed there are big differences between the biological and artificial versions.
Oh, huge differences. Biological neurons are vastly more complex internally. The brain's connectivity is astronomical compared to current artificial nets. Biological learning is continuous, adaptive. Artificial nets often need explicit retraining on big data sets. We're still just scratching the surface, really.
Makes sense. So how do we arrange these artificial neurons? What are the common network architectures?
The simplest is often the feed-forward network. Information just flows one way, input layer, through maybe some hidden layers, to the output layer, no loops.
Straight through.
Right. And with enough hidden units and the right activation functions, these networks are universal approximators. They can theoretically learn almost any continuous function.
Wow. Okay. Then there are recurrent neural networks, RNNs. They do have loops.
Exactly. RNNs have connections that loop back, allowing information to persist. They have a kind of memory. This makes them good for sequential data, like text or time series, where context matters.
Like understanding a sentence, you need to remember the earlier words.
Precisely. Standard RNNs can struggle with long sequences, though, which led to things like LSTM's long short-term memory networks. They have special gates to control the information flow and memory better.
Gates to remember or forget things.
Kind of, yeah. An input gate, Forget gate, output gate, managing the cell's memory state more effectively over long durations.
Clever. And the third big one, convolutional neural networks, CNNs, famous for images.
Yes, CNNs are designed for grid-like data, especially images. They use convolutional layers with filters that slide across the input looking for specific features, edges, textures, etc.
Like little feature detectors.
Exactly. And they typically have pooling layers that downsample, making the representation more robust and compact. They learn hierarchies of features automatically, from simple lines up to complex objects.
Very powerful for visual tasks. Now, how do we actually train these networks? The sources mention different learning paradigms.
Right. The main three are supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning.
Okay, supervised first.
Supervised learning is when you have labeled data. For each input, you know the correct output. Think image classification. Here's a picture. Label it cat. The network learns by comparing its output to the known correct label and adjusting its weights to reduce the error.
Learning from examples with answers.
Exactly. Regression predicting a number is also supervised.
Okay. And unsupervised. No labels.
Correct. With unsupervised learning, you just give the network data and it has to find structure on its own, like clustering similar data points together, or dimensionality reduction, finding a more compact way to represent the data, or anomaly detection, spotting unusual outliers.
Just finding patterns without being told what to look for.
And the third one is reinforcement learning.
Where an agent learns by trial and error, like training a dog with treats.
That's a distant analogy.
Right.
You have an agent interacting with an environment. It takes actions and gets rewards or penalties. The goal is to learn a policy, a strategy for choosing actions that maximizes its total reward over time.
Learning to play a game, for instance.
Exactly. Game playing is a classic application. It often involves learning value functions, how good is it to be in this state, or directly learning the policy using methods like Q-learning or policy gradients.
Gotcha. So, supervised, unsupervised, reinforcement. Different ways to teach these networks.
Yeah, depending on the problem and the data you have.
It's undeniable. These neural networks, inspired by brains, are incredibly powerful. Image recognition, language translation, forecasting. The applications are everywhere.
Absolutely. They've been transformative.
Okay, let's shift from individual neurons, even artificial ones, to the collective. Swarm intelligence. The wisdom of the crowd. Literally, what's the core idea here?
Swarm intelligence looks at how decentralized systems like ant colonies, bird flocks, fish schools achieve complex, intelligent collective behavior without a leader.
No central control.
Right. Key principles are that decentralized control, where individuals act based on local info, and self-organization, where global patterns emerge from those local interactions.
And what drives that self-organization?
Usually a mix of things. Positive feedback, where behavior gets reinforced, like ants following a strong pheromone trail. Negative feedback, which helps stabilize things. Randomness or fluctuations to explore new options. And just lots and lots of simple interactions between individuals.
Okay, let's look at specific algorithms. Ant colony optimization, ACO. How does that mimic the ants?
It's directly inspired by how ants find short paths to food using pheromones. An ant finds food, leaves a pheromone trail back. Other ants are more likely to follow stronger trails.
So shorter paths get reinforced faster because ants return quicker.
Exactly. It's a positive feedback loop. More ants use the short path, strengthen the trail, attract more ants. Nature's optimization.
So the algorithm uses virtual ants and pheromones.
Pretty much. Artificial ants build solutions probabilistically, biased by artificial pheromone levels on solution components. Pheromones get updated based on solution quality, and they usually evaporate slowly to avoid getting stuck too early. It's great for routing problems like the traveling salesperson problem or network routing.
Cool. And the other big one, particle swarm optimization, PSO, inspired by birds and fish.
Yeah, PSO mimics how individuals in a flock or school adjust their movement based on their own experience and the group's experience.
Social learning, kind of.
Exactly. In PSO, you have a swarm of particles, each representing a potential solution. Each particle has a position and velocity in the search space.
Yep.
Particles update their velocity based on two things: their own best position found so far, personal best, and the best position found by any particle in the swarm, global best. They're pulled towards both individual and collective success.
A balance between exploring alone and following the crowd.
Precisely. There are parameters to tune that balance inertia: attraction to personal best, attraction to global best. PSO works really well for many continuous optimization problems in engineering, machine learning, scheduling.
The sources also mentioned bee colony optimization and the Firefly algorithm briefly.
Yeah, more bio-inspiration. Bee colony optimization mimics how bees search for nectar sources, scout bees explore, recruited bees exploit good finds, useful for balancing exploration and exploitation in search.
Makes sense.
The firefly algorithm is based on how fireflies flash to attract mates. Brighter flashes, better solutions, attract other fireflies. It can be good for finding multiple optimal solutions in a landscape.
It's really striking how simple individual rules lead to sophisticated group problem solving. Applications in robotics or distributed systems seem obvious.
Absolutely. Swarm intelligence gives us models for building robust, scalable, adaptive systems without needing that central controller. Very valuable principles.
Okay, let's move to cellular automata and artificial life. Simple rules, complex worlds sounds intriguing. What are cellular automata?
Okay, so a cellular automaton CA is basically a grid of cells. Each cell has a state, like on or off, or maybe a few colors.
Like pixels on a screen?
Kinda, yeah. And the state of each cell in the next time step is determined by a simple rule based on its current state and the states of its immediate neighbors.
So local rules only.
Exactly. All cells update simultaneously based on these local rules. And despite the simplicity, CAs can generate incredibly complex and dynamic patterns over time.
The most famous example is Conway's Game of Life.
Definitely. It's iconic. Simple 2D grid, cells are alive or dead.
Yep.
Just a few rules based on how many living neighbors a cell has determine if it lives, dies, or is born in the next step.
Rules for survival, death by loneliness or overcrowding, birth.
Right. And from those simple rules, you get amazing patterns. Gliders that move, oscillators that blink, complex structures that evolve. And amazingly, the game of life is computationally universal.
Meaning it can compute anything a regular computer can, in theory.
Yes, which is mind-blowing given the simplicity of its rules. It shows how complexity can emerge from simple local interactions.
Where are CAs actually used? Biology, for instance.
Yeah, they're good for modeling things where local interactions matter, like pattern formation, animal coats, shell patterns, simulating epidemics spread through a population, modeling predator-prey dynamics in ecology.
And beyond biology, physics, chemistry.
They've been used to model fluid dynamics, phase transitions in materials, reaction diffusion systems in chemistry where chemicals spread and react locally. They're a surprisingly versatile modeling tool.
Okay, and artificial life. A life. That sounds like taking it further.
It is. A life is about studying life itself by creating lifelike systems, usually in computer simulations, trying to understand evolution, behavior, ecosystems by building artificial versions.
Synthesizing life in silico.
That's the idea. Think digital organisms, self-replicating programs that evolve in a virtual environment, like the Avita system. Researchers can set up selection pressures and watch evolution happen, studying adaptation, speciation, all in the computer.
Using simulation to probe the fundamental rules of life and evolution.
Exactly, studying emergence and complexity by building it from the ground up virtually.
Very cool. Okay, related but different. Agent-based modeling, ABM. How does that differ from CAs?
While CAs have uniform cells and rules on a grid, ABM focuses on individual autonomous agents. These agents can be more complex, have unique rules, states, behaviors, and they interact with each other and an environment.
So less uniform, more individualistic.
Right. The focus is on how the system's overall behavior emerges from the actions and interactions of these heterogeneous agents. Agents can often learn or adapt their behavior too.
Where is ABM applied? It sounds like it could model lots of things.
It's incredibly broad. Epidemiology modeling disease, spread by simulating individual people and their contacts, economics modeling consumers, firms, market dynamics, ecology, predator-prey, resource management, social sciences, opinion dynamics, crowd behavior, social network effects, public health planning, policy testing.
The sources highlighted environmental modeling specifically.
Yeah, it's very useful there. Modeling population dynamics, impact of climate change on species, effects of habitat fragmentation, sustainable harvesting strategies. You model the individual animals or plants and see what happens at the ecosystem level.
And again, that theme of emergence seems central.
Absolutely. ABM is fundamentally about understanding how complex macro-level patterns arise from micro-level agent interactions. Self-organization is often a key output.
Micro actions leading to macro outcomes.
Got it. Okay, let's really push the boundaries now. Unconventional computing paradigms. Beyond silicon. First up, DNA computing. We touched on it. But how does it compute?
It uses actual DNA molecules and biochemical reactions, leveraging things like DNA strands, binding together very specifically hybridization and enzymes that can cut, copy, or join DNA.
Using molecular biology as hardware.
Pretty much. The potential pluses are massive parallelism, trillions of molecules working at once, incredible information density, potentially very energy efficient, and operating at the nanoscale.
Edelman's experiment was the big proof of concept, solving that path problem.
Yeah, the Hamiltonian path problem. He encoded a small graph using DNA strand cities as sequences, routes as strands that could link them, then used biochemical reactions like filtering and amplification to isolate the DNA strands representing the correct path.
A landmark achievement. What else is being explored? People have made DNA-based logic gates. They're looking at solving other hard problems like SAT. DNA for long-term data storage is a big one, and maybe eventually tiny biocomputers for medical diagnostics or drug delivery inside the body.
But there are challenges, obviously.
Oh, yeah. Error rates in the biochemistry can be relatively high. The reactions are much slower than electronic switches. And we lack standardization and easy automation for doing it at scale right now. It's still early days.
Okay. Next, unconventional star.
Ew.
Quantum computing. Lots of buzz around this. What makes it different?
It uses quantum mechanics. Instead of classical bits being 0 or 1, quantum bits qubits can be 0A and D1 simultaneously thanks to superposition.
Both at once.
In a probabilistic sense, yeah. And they can be entangled, linked together so they share the same fate instantly, regardless of distance. That's where the real power comes from.
Superposition and entanglement are the keys.
They are. They allow quantum computers to explore exponentially many possibilities at once for certain problems. They use quantum gates to manipulate qubits. People are building them using things like superconducting circuits or trapped ions.
What kinds of problems are they good for?
Big ones include breaking current encryption, like Shor's algorithm for factoring, simulating quantum systems accurately, like designing new materials or drugs, solving really hard optimization problems, and potentially boosting AI and machine learning.
But it's not ready for prime time yet. Major hurdles remain.
Definitely. Maintaining the fragile quantum states fighting decoherence is incredibly hard. Correcting errors is a huge challenge. And we're still discovering the best algorithms to run on them. It's a long-term research effort.
Makes sense. Another one mentioned was membrane computing, or P systems, inspired by cells.
Yeah, inspired by how cell membranes create compartments. P systems use nested membrane structures. Inside each membrane compartment, you have objects that follow rules, transforming or moving between membranes.
Like parallel processing in different cellular compartments.
Exactly. Computation happens in parallel across the structure. Objects evolve, communicate across membranes. Membranes can even divide or dissolve.
Any advantages?
They're computationally universal, like Turing machines. And some types can theoretically solve hard problems faster by exploiting that parallelism. They're also a natural fit for modeling biological cells, but simulating them is complex, and real-world applications beyond modeling are still limited.
Okay. And lastly, optical and chemical computing, using light or reactions.
Right. Optical computing uses photons instead of electrons. Potential for higher speed and bandwidth, manipulating light with lasers, fibers, etc. Chemical computing uses chemical reactions. Concentrations of chemicals encode info. Reactions perform the computation.
Potential applications.
Optical might be good for high-speed communications, maybe optical neural networks. Chemical computing could do parallel computation, model biological patterns, maybe build smart sensors, but both face big challenges in scalability, stability, speed for chemical reactions, and just reading out the results reliably.
It's amazing the sheer variety of approaches, all drawing from nature somehow.
It really is. They might not replace your laptop soon, but for specific hard problems, these unconventional ideas could be game changers down the line.
So wrapping this deep dive up, we've seen how nature is just this incredible source book for computational ideas, evolution, brains, swarms, molecules.
Yeah, a constant wellspring of inspiration.
And at the same time, computation is becoming this indispensable lens for understanding nature's own complexities. Climate, ecosystems, disease.
It's a two-way street, definitely. And the potential across so many fields, medicine, materials, AI, environment, is just huge.
Absolutely. It really makes you think.
Yeah, and maybe a final thought for listeners to mull over is, what does it mean as these lines between the natural and the artificial keep getting blurrier? What new possibilities does that open up? But also, what new responsibilities come with that convergence? Think about the examples we discussed. DNA computing, AI inspired by brains, evolving digital life. Where does that lead? It's definitely something worth pondering as this field continues to evolve so rapidly.